It was in the late autumn of 1888 that one of the most singular cases in the long annals of my association with Sherlock Holmes first presented itself. The days had grown short, and the fog of London lay upon the city like a barrier shroud. Chesamot the word. I recall clearly the dim yellow of the gas lamps struggling feebly through the haze, the constant clatter of hansom cabs upon wet cobblestones, and the peculiar air of dread which hung upon us all, though none could say precisely why. At Baker Street, however, the mood was different. Our sitting room was warmed by a bright coal fire, the familiar scent of pipe smoke thick in the air, and my companion lay sprawled upon the settee, his long thin frame stretched at ease, while his keen grey eyes remained anything but idle. He was studying a slip of paper with such intensity that I wondered if it might combust beneath his gaze. You have been upon that same scrap for nearly an hour, Holmes. Oh, what intelligence does it contain that should so rivet you?
Merely a request for aid, my dear Watson. A request clothed in vagueness, which makes it all the more interesting. The letter purports to come from a certain Colonel Sir Reginald Stanhope, recently returned from colonial service in India. He writes of a family seat in Devonshire and of a curse said to dwell upon the waterfall near his estate.
A curse, Holmes. Surely you cannot lend credence to such superstition.
Superstition is but the refuge of those who have not yet perceived the chain of cause and effect. I do not for an instant accept the existence of curses. Yet I observe with interest the effect of such beliefs upon the human mind, and the human conduct that springs therefrom. Remember, Watson, it is not the legend that kills. It is the man who acts under the influence of the legend.
I could not help but smile, for I had heard such pronouncements from him often, and each time they struck me with renewed force. Holmes, it seemed, had a way of stripping away the fog of imagination to reveal the cold bones of reality beneath. Yet as I gazed upon him in that moment, I confess that a shiver passed along my spine, for there was in his voice a certain undertone, as though he sensed already that in this case there would be danger aplenty. And what action do you propose we take?
Why, we go to Devonshire, of course. The Colonel requests our presence with urgency. His letter bears signs of haste. The ink blot here, the irregular strokes there. He is a man of disciplined habits, no doubt. Yet this letter reveals agitation. Something has already occurred which has shaken him from composure.
You read all that from a blot of ink?
From the blot, and from the tremor in the line, and from the very choice of words, my dear fellow. It is all elementary.
Warning, thus it was settled. By the following morning, we had packed our cases and with little delay were on the train bound for the west. The journey was long and dreary, the rain streaking upon the carriage windows, while I occupied myself with my medical notes and Holmes with his pipe and silence. Yet I could not shake from my mind the phrase which he had read aloud from the colonel's letter. The curse of the waterfall has claimed another. At Exeter Station, we were met by the colonel himself, a tall, spare man of military bearing, with silvered hair and a face deeply lined by both sun and worry. His handshake was firm, yet his eyes betrayed an unrest that no discipline could entirely conceal.
Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, I cannot tell you what a relief it is to see you. You come at a most desperate hour.
We lose no time, Colonel. Tell us, has another death indeed occurred, as your letter implied?
Aye, my own steward, Samuel Price. Samuel Price. 2 nights ago, he was found lifeless at the foot of the great waterfall that lies within our estate. And what chills my blood, sir, is that he is the third 3 men in as many months, each claimed in the self-same fashion.
You suggest they fell?
Some say fell, some say jumped, and the villagers whisper that they were dragged by a force unseen. They call it the curse of the Stanhope waterfall. I cannot abide such talk, but I cannot deny the deaths either.
You are wise to reject superstition, Colonel. Yet you are also wise to summon me. We shall look upon this waterfall, and upon the bodies if possible. For the dead, no less than the living, may yield up their secrets to an inquiring eye.
The colonel nodded gravely, and soon we were seated within his carriage, the horses drawing us through the winding Devonshire lanes. The landscape grew wilder as we advanced, great towers of granite rising against the darkening sky, and a moor that stretched desolate and silent save for the wind. At last we came in sight of Stanhope Hall, a vast grey edifice standing grim against the encroaching night, and beyond it, through the mist, I glimpsed the white roar of tumbling water. That night, after a hurried supper in the echoing dining hall, we were conducted to our chambers. I confess that fatigue weighed heavily upon me, but not so upon Holmes. Long after the household had retired, I found him at the window of our shared room, his silhouette stark against the moonlight, gazing out toward the waterfall. Holmes, where you never sleep, the hour grows late.
Sleep, Watson, is for those who have not a mystery roaring in their ears. Do you not hear it? The voice of that waterfall, nature herself, thundering like an orator, proclaiming some dreadful truth which man has not yet deciphered.
To me, it is but water tumbling over rocks.
And therein lies the difference between us, my dear fellow. To you, the sound is but sound. To me, it is the overture to a drama. Come the morrow, we shall attend the stage and watch the play unfold.
With that, he turned from the window, his keen eyes alight with anticipation, and I knew that whatever dark force haunted this place, Sherlock Holmes had already cast his lot against it. The following day dawned with a sky of iron. Colonel Stanhope led us to the falls, a mile's walk across sodden fields and into a narrow gorge where the land seemed to close about us like a pair of jaws. There, through the mist and spray, the waterfall revealed itself in its awful grandeur, thundering down from a height of 60 feet into a cauldron of foam below. Its very ground trembled with its power. By heavens, Holmes, to stumble upon these rocks would be certain death.
Just so, Watson. And yet, note the path. Though perilous, it is still a path. One does not tumble here by chance, but rather by design or compulsion.
Holmes crouched upon the whetstones, his gaze flitting from mark to mark with an intensity that left me bewildered. He plucked up a broken branch, sniffed it, cast it aside, then examined a scuff upon the rock face with his lens.
Observe, Watson, the print of a boot. The heel is square, the tread heavy, a labourer's boot, consistent with that of a steward. Yet see here another mark overlaying it, a finer sole, narrow, likely that of a lady. And here, the drag of a cane or walking stick. Curious, most curious.
You astonish me, Holmes. Are you suggesting that another was with him?
I suggest nothing. I merely observe. But the conclusion, when it comes, will brook no doubt.
At that instant, a sharp cry rang out from behind us. I returned to behold a young woman, pale and trembling, who had approached unobserved. She was clad in a simple gown, her hair disordered, her eyes wide with fear.
You must not go nearer. The falls are cursed. Do not tempt fate as the others did.
Mary, what are you doing here? Return to the hall at once.
I cannot, Father. I cannot rest while the curse remains. Each night I dream of it, and each day I feel its pull. Mr. Holmes, you must save us. You must.
Holmes bowed with grave courtesy, yet his eyes shone with that peculiar gleam I had come to recognize, the gleam of discovery hovering just beyond his reach.
Miss Stanhope, I assure you I shall leave no stone unturned. But I must beg you to tell me all you know. The safety of others may depend upon it.
And so, by the thundering roar of the cursed waterfall, the tale began to unravel. The strange apparition of young Miss Mary Stanhope, trembling by the torrent, haunted my thoughts throughout that day. We returned with her and the colonel to the hall, the mist closing behind us like the curtain of some grim theatre. Holmes, however, appeared invigorated rather than troubled. I recognized that eager light in his eye, which always betokened that he scented a pew. Holmes, what do you make of the girl's terror? Is she merely afflicted with the common superstition of these parts, or do you suspect she knows more than she dares reveal?
A very pertinent question, Watson. Observe her manner. Agitation genuine, yet her words chosen with curious restraint. She fears the waterfall, but also fears something more immediate. Did you note how her glance shifted toward her father before she spoke?
Indeed, I did, yet surely you would not suggest that the colonel himself.
I suggest nothing as yet, but I record every gesture, every hesitation. One never knows which trifle may illuminate the whole.
That evening, after supper, Holmes and I took a stroll through the village, which lay a short distance from the hall. The air was heavy with smoke from peat fires, and the narrow lanes echoed with the gossip of rustic folk who regarded us with a mixture of suspicion and hope. The tale of the waterfall had evidently cast a pall over the community. The people stared at us as though we carried the cure to their plague.
So we may, in a sense. Fear spreads like contagion, and nothing will allay it but reason. Come, let us enter this inn. I perceive from the sign that it is the King's Arms, and such a place is the crucible of village rumour.
Within, we found a low-ceilinged chamber, warm with firelight and loud with the murmur of voices. The landlord, a stout man with ruddy cheeks, eyed us with curiosity as we ordered ale and seated ourselves at a corner table. It was not long before a knot of villagers approached, emboldened perhaps by the drink or by our London attire.
Beg pardon, sirs, but you're from the hall, ain't you? Strangers come for the curse, we reckoned.
We come at the invitation of Colonel Stanhope to inquire into the deaths at the waterfall. You call it a curse. Pray, tell me why.
Could it have been that way since old Sir William's day, sir? Long ago, afore the Colonel's time, Sir William wronged a gipsy woman, drove her from the land with cruel words. She set her spell upon the fall, swore that any man who drew water there would find death. First it was cattle, then shepherds, and now, God help us, it's back again.
Surely you cannot credit such a tale in this century?
Begging your pardon, Doctor, but we've seen too many bodies fetched from the pool below. My own brother swore he heard voices in the spray calling him by name. He scarce slept after, till he was found gone.
Voices, you say? Most interesting. And tell me, have these deaths occurred at any particular hour?
Always at night, sir, dark of the moon mostly. Folks say the falls glow then like silver fire.
Holmes's eyes glittered, though he masked it quickly by sipping his ale.
Gentlemen, madam, I thank you for your candour. Rest assured, I mean to examine every feature of this so-called curse, and I give you my solemn word. If it is the work of mortal hands, those hands shall be uncovered.
A murmur of approval and relief ran through the company, though some crossed themselves furtively, as though to ward against meddling with forces unseen. Holmes, however, rose abruptly and beckoned me to follow. "The gut, you depart so soon? We might have learned more. Taste stay here."
We have learned precisely enough. The legend of the gypsy, the voices in the spray, the glow of the water, all fragments of a mosaic which begins to take form. Come, Watson, the night is fine for observation.
We quitted the inn and made our way back along the dark lanes to the gorge. The roar of the waterfall greeted us like the growl of some monstrous beast. The moon had risen, casting a pale glow upon the spray, which indeed shimmered with a spectral light. By Jove, Holmes, it does glow. See how the mist catches the moonlight, as though it were silver flames.
A beautiful optical effect, no doubt aided by certain minerals in the rock. Yet beauty often conceals danger. Look there, do you see upon the far side a faint glimmer, as of a lantern quickly extinguished?
I see nothing. Wait, yes, a flicker only. Someone lurks yonder.
Indeed, we are not the only night watchers here. Remain silent, Watson, and crouch low.
Gamma. We hid behind a boulder, scarcely daring to breathe. Minutes passed, and then we perceived a figure moving upon the opposite bank. It paused, lifted something that caught the moonlight, a rod perhaps, or a length of metal, and seemed to place it into the torrent itself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure melted into the darkness. What devilry is this? Holmes, did you see?
I saw enough to confirm my suspicion. Come, Watson, we must examine that spot at first light. For now, it would be folly to attempt the crossing in darkness.
I hardly slept that night, my mind restless with images of spectral lights and shadowy figures by the roaring falls. But Holmes seemed content, stretched upon his bed with the faintest of smiles, as though he had glimpsed already the outline of truth. At dawn, we returned to the gorge, and with the colonel's permission, descended to the place where the mysterious figure had stood. There Holmes bent with his lens and gave a cry of satisfaction.
See here, Watson, home, the imprint of boots, not the rough soles of a peasant, but well-made leather, narrow at the toe. Read, and here scraps of wire, recently cut. The fellow was at work, not in worship.
At work upon what?
That is the question. But note how these wires lead into the torrent itself. They vanish beneath the spray. Someone has contrived a mechanism in connection with the falls, Watson, and I mean to discover its purpose.
Even as he spoke, a voice hailed us from the ridge above. It was Miss Mary, pained with alarm.
Mr. Holmes, father begs your presence at once. There has been another death.
Another? Good heavens, who now?
Mr. James Trevor, the curate's son, he was found at dawn dashed upon the rocks, just as the others.
Holmes's jaw set like iron.
Watson, the pace quickens. The hand behind these tragedies grows bolder. We must move with equal speed, lest more lives be claimed.
And so, with the roar of the waterfall at our backs and the cries of the villagers rising in dread, we hastened once more toward the hall, knowing that the heart of the mystery was at last within our grasp. The news of young James Trevor's death spread through the village like fire through dry brush. By the time Holmes and I reached the hall, a grim crowd had already gathered about the stables where the body had been laid. Faces pale with horror peered at us, and whispers followed in our wake, as though we bore the judgment of fate itself. The poor lad, hardly 20, to be cut down in such a fashion is monstrous.
Monstrous, yes, but not mysterious, at least not in the supernatural sense. Come, Watson, let us view the body. The dead, as I often remind you, are eloquent witnesses.
Within the stable, the curate himself stood bowed with grief, his hands trembling over the form of his son, which lay upon a makeshift bier. Holmes removed his hat solemnly and bent over the body, his keen eyes missing no detail. The skull is fractured. He must have struck the rocks below the falls.
Indeed. But see here, the bruising upon the wrists, the abrasions along the arms. These are not the injuries of a fall alone. No, Watson, this youth struggled against some restraint before he met his end.
You mean he was forced?
Precisely. He was seized, bound perhaps, and then thrown into the torrent. This was no accident nor curse, but deliberate murder.
A murmur of horror rose among those present. Colonel Stanhope's face darkened as though with storm.
Then the fiend walks among us still. Tell me, Mr. Holmes, who is guilty of this outrage? My household shall not rest until justice is done.
Patience, Colonel. The truth hides, but it cannot hide long. We must ask not only who had the strength to commit this act, but who had cause, and who possessed knowledge of the waterfall's secret paths.
Holmes turned his gaze upon the assembled servants, footmen, maids, and grooms, each shrinking back from his piercing eyes. Then he addressed them in a voice as calm as it was commanding.
If any among you knows aught that may bear upon these debts, speak now. Silence is complicity, and complicity may in the end prove fatal.
Station, none spoke, though I detected unease in more than one countenance. At last Holmes straightened, replaced his hat, and motioned me away. You think one of them is complicit?
I think fear seals many mouths, Watson. But I also think that the heart of this riddle lies not in whispered superstition, but in tangible contrivance. We must return to the falls at once. Yes,
Once more we braved the gorge, the street drenching us like rain. Holmes descended with fearless agility, his eyes scanning every inch of the cliff. At a ledge near the water's edge, he gave a cry of triumph.
Watson, see here, iron rods driven into the rock, concealed by moss and spray, and attached. Look, fine wires trailing into the torrent. This is no natural feature, but an apparatus contrived by human ingenuity.
But for what purpose? Surely no man could work machinery beneath such a torrent.
On the contrary, the water itself is the machinery. Observe, these rods, when connected by wire, might serve to channel electricity or to create a resonance. The roar of the falls may be used to mask some artificial sound. Recall the villagers' tales of voices.
You suggest those voices were produced, engineered?
Exactly. Imagine a horn or tube concealed in the rocks, conducting sound from some hidden operator. A clever trick to instill terror in simple minds. And terror, my dear Watson, is a potent weapon.
I confess, I shuddered at the thought. To turn the very power of nature into an instrument of deception was a devilry worthy of the keenest malice. But who would contrive such a scheme, and why?
That is the next link in the chain. But mark my words, the motive is not phantoms, but property, power, or passion. Always the same. 3, Watson.
As we clambered back to the path, a figure emerged from the trees. It was Miss Mary once more, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly together.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I beg you cease your investigations. Already too many have died. If you persist, I fear you too shall be taken.
Miss Stanhope, your concern does you credit, yet your words betray knowledge beyond mere fear. You know something. Confess it.
No, I only that the falls bring doom. I cannot exclaim more.
Cannot or will not. Very well, I shall not press you now. But understand this, truth concealed breeds only further tragedy. Consider carefully where your silence may lead.
She turned away, tears glimmering in her eyes, and hurried back toward the hall. Holmes watched her with narrowed gaze. She knows more than she admits, Holmes. Holmes.
Undoubtedly, she is caught in a net of loyalty and fear. The question is, loyalty to whom? To her father? To another?
That evening, Holmes requested permission of Colonel Stanhope to examine the family archives. We were conducted to a gloomy chamber lined with ancient ledgers, parchments, and maps. Holmes set to work with his customary vigor, turning page after page with feverish haste.
Ha ha! Here, Watson, an old survey of the estate. Note this passage, subterranean channel connecting the upper stream to the grotto beneath the falls. Do you see? There exists a cavern hidden within the cascade itself.
A cavern? Then a man might lurk there unseen and produce the very voices of which the villagers speak.
Precisely. And more, he might even contrive to drag his victims into the torrent, unseen by those above. The perfect lair for a phantom.
At that moment, a footstep echoed in the corridor beyond. Holmes closed the ledger sharply and motioned me to silence. We waited only to hear the soft retreat of someone who had paused at the door. Someone was listening.
Yes, and that someone now knows we are upon the scent. The game quickens, Watson.
And quicken it did, for scarcely had we retired to our chamber when a cry rang out from below, followed by the crash of breaking glass. We rushed down to find the library in disarray, the window shattered, and the ledgers we had been studying scattered upon the floor. The lantern lay overturned, its flame narrowly extinguished before it could ignite the papers. An attempt to destroy the evidence.
More than that, it was meant as a warning. The enemy grows desperate, Watson. But he reveals himself by his very fear.
We spent the remainder of that night in uneasy vigil. Holmes paced the floor like a caged panther, his mind working furiously. At last, toward dawn, he halted before me, his eyes alight with the fire of resolution.
Watson, the curtain rises upon the final act. I must inspect the cavern beneath the falls, and I must do so this very night. But it is perilous in the extreme. I shall require your steady hand and your revolver.
You may rely upon both, Holmes. Where you go, I go.
I knew I might count upon you, my dear fellow. Then steel yourself, for tonight we enter the very jaws of the so-called curse, and let us see if man's deceit may withstand the gaze of reason.
Thus, with the roar of the waterfall echoing ever in our ears, we prepared ourselves for the descent into darkness. That night, the storm broke over Devonshire with a violence seldom seen. The wind rattled shutters and tore at the trees, while the thunder of the fall seemed doubled by the heavens themselves. Yet it was on that wild night that Holmes chose to penetrate the cavern hidden beneath the torrent. Armed with lanterns, ropes, and my revolver, we set out at midnight from the hall. Colonel Stanhope would have detained us, but Holmes merely bowed and assured him that the honor of his house depended upon swift action. Miss Mary wept silently at the stairhead as we departed, and I confess her pale face haunted me as we strode across the fields. Holmes, do you truly think it wise to attempt this descent in such weather? Current will be swollen to madness.
Precisely why we must attempt it tonight, Watson. Our adversary will assume no man dares such a venture in this storm. Secrecy is our ally. Courage, my friend. The truth lies within that roar.
Reaching the gorge, we found the waterfall a white fury, its spray lashing us like whips. Holmes tied a stout rope about his waist and secured it to a tree, then handed me the second length.
Follow close, Watson. Keep the lantern high, and whatever happens, do not lose your footing. The path is narrow, but sound.
Inch by inch, we crept along the slippery ledge, the abyss yawning below. At length, Holmes pointed to a dark cleft, half hidden by the falling water. With a cry, he plunged forward, drawing me after, and in an instant we were within a cavern, the roar of the cascade forming a thunderous curtain at the entrance. By heavens, Holmes, what a place! This grotto might house an army unseen.
And perhaps it has housed one man, which is enough. Look about you, Watson, observe.
The lantern light revealed a chamber carved by nature, yet altered by human hand. Heiss, iron rods were fixed in the rock, supporting lengths of wire and tubing. At one side lay a crude apparatus of bellows, pipes, and a speaking trumpet, all cunningly arranged to project sound through the waterfall itself. Then it is true, the voices of the falls were but trickery.
Ingenious trickery, designed to play upon superstition. Observe also these chains and manacles fixed to the wall, tools of coercion. Our murderer lured or dragged his victims here, bound them, and then cast them into the torrent.
Fiendish. But to what end?
Patience, Watson. Motive must soon declare itself. Yet I suspect it lies in the inheritance of the Stanhope estate. Someone profits by the deaths.
Even as he spoke, a faint sound reached us above the roar, a scrape of stone, a breath. Holmes extinguished the lantern with a swift motion, plunging us into darkness. We crouched in silence. Presently, a figure entered the cavern from a hidden side passage, bearing a lantern of his own. In its glow, we beheld a face twisted with malice, the face of Colonel Stanhope's steward, Samuel Price, whom we had been told was the first victim. Holmes, he lives.
Hush, Watson.
The man moved to the apparatus, adjusted the tubes, and then spoke into the trumpet. A ghastly wailing issued forth, magnified by the falls, echoing like the voices of the dead.
Another soul for the torrent, another offering to the curse.
At this, Holmes sprang forward, striking the lantern from the fellow's hand and seizing him by the collar. I rushed to his aid, and together we bore the struggling wretch to the ground.
So, Samuel Price, the ghost, returns to life. Your masquerade is at an end.
Curse you, Holmes, you meddling devil.
Spare your curses. Explain rather how you contrived your false death.
I left my coat and boots at the falls. Let the villagers think I'd been taken. Then I had freedom to work unseen. They all feared this curse too much to search closely.
Clever, but your purpose?
Purpose? Huh. The colonel's estate, lands rich in tin and copper. He would not exploit them, but I knew their worth. With each death, the villagers' terror grew, and soon even Stanhope himself would have fled. The hall would fall into ruin, the land into my hands. Mine!
Oh, you madman, you murdered innocents for gain.
They were nothing. Peasants, a clerk, the curate's boy. I needed their deaths to keep the legend alive.
And so you cloaked greed in superstition. But you overreached, Price. Had you not slain the boy, suspicion might never have turned upon the living steward.
Holmes bound the fellow swiftly with the very chains he had prepared for his victims. We dragged him to the entrance, where the storm had somewhat abated, and by dawn delivered him into the hands of Colonel Stanhope and the village constable.
Price, my own steward, the man I trusted above all. To think such villainy lurked beneath my roof.
Do not reproach yourself, Colonel. The most venomous snake often wears the smoothest skin. Yet the truth is laid bare at last.
Mr. Holmes, you have freed us. The curse is broken.
Nay, Miss Stanhope, the curse never was. Only man's deception, now unmasked. Remember well, superstition is but the veil by which the wicked hide their craft.
The villagers rejoiced as though a plague had been lifted, yet I could not forget the faces of those poor souls whose lives had been sacrificed to Price's greed. Holmes, however, remained calm, smoking his pipe as we journeyed back toward London. You astonish me, Holmes. From the first, you suspected mortal hands rather than spectral. Yet, how could you be certain?
Because, my dear Watson, nature is consistent. Waterfalls, rocks endure, winds blow. But when men die by identical means, time after time, then man, not nature, is at work. To assume otherwise is to abandon reason. How gone, sir?
And the voices, the glow, the supposed curse, all contrived?
Elementary, optical, and acoustic effects, Watson, heightened by cunning contrivances. A lantern placed cunningly here, a tube concealed there, enough to deceive the ignorant, but not, I trust, a student of deduction.
Thus ended the mystery of the cursed waterfall. Yet, though the apparatus was dismantled and the murderer brought to justice, the roar of those falls haunts me still. And whenever I recall the silver spray shining in the moonlight, I see again the tall figure of my friend, striding fearless into peril, armed with nothing but his reason and conquering even the darkest superstition with the light of truth. It was with immense relief that I found myself once more in the comfort of our lodgings at 221B Bake. R Street, The cracking of the fire, the rattle of hansom cabs upon Baker Street below, and the aromatic haze of Holmes's tobacco combined to assure me that the world had resumed its proper order. Yet my thoughts lingered upon Devonshire, upon the roaring torrent, and the shadowy cavern where death had so long held dominion. Holmes sat opposite me, stretched languidly in his chair, his eyes half closed, his long fingers steeped together. One might have thought him the very picture of indolence. Were it not for the faint glimmer of amusement that played upon his lips, I knew that expression well. It signified that my friend awaited my inevitable questions, as a schoolmaster awaits the pupil's stumbling recitation. Holmes, I confess myself bewildered still. You saw through the deception from the first, while I, and indeed the entire countryside, remained convinced of supernatural agency. Camille, how did you so quickly discard the idea of a curse?
Because, Watson, curses are the province of the imagination, not of fact. I reason thus. Either the waterfall is in itself an agent of death, in which case the accidents would be random and varied, or else some intelligence directs the deaths, in which case they will be uniform and purposeful. The three victims perished in identical fashion, struck upon the rocks below. Therefore, the agency was human.
Yet surely the glowing spray, the voices, the tales of villagers, these were convincing enough to any rational mind.
Convincing to any mind that relies upon impression rather than analysis. Consider, moonlight upon spray will always produce spectral effects. As for voices, we have long known the capacity of tubes and trumpets to project sound. Recall my remark about the ink draught in the colonel's letter, the agitation of a man of discipline. That agitation spoke of mortal terror, not of fanciful curse. Once you have eliminated the impossible, Watson, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Then the steward, Bryce, was your suspect from the first.
Not my suspect, but my hypothesis. The fact that his death was unconfirmed, that no body had been recovered, at once roused my suspicion. Villagers are prone to hysteria, and a coat and boots upon the rocks suffice to convince them. Yet absence of evidence is not evidence of death. Thus I reserved judgment until the cavern revealed itself.
I could not but admire the clarity with which he expounded these matters. Yet there lingered in me a question that touched not on logic but on humanity. Holmes, do you feel no outrage at the cruelty of the man? Those poor souls, lured to death for greed. Does not such wickedness stir you to anger?
Anger clouds judgment, Watson. I prefer cold detachment. Thrice is but one more specimen for the cabinet of human folly. His avarice, his cunning, his exploitation of superstition, all instructive, all lamentably predictable. If his crimes excite me at all, it is only as material for study. The law will punish him. My concern is merely to ensure that the facts are clear.
And yet, Mary Stanhope,
Ah, yes, a sensitive soul torn between loyalty and suspicion. She guessed more than she admitted. But her silence was born of filial duty, not guilt. I trust she will recover her peace now that the shadow has lifted from her father's house.
I pondered his words in silence. In his left, to me, the case was filled with human tragedy and pathos. To Holmes, it was but a demonstration of principles. Yet perhaps it was this very detachment that allowed him to pierce the veil of deceit when others faltered. One lesson I draw from this, Holmes, is how perilous superstition can be. Honest men and women, driven by fear of a phantom, allowed themselves to be blinded to the truth.
Exactly so. Superstition is but the abdication of reason. A cunning rogue has but to whisper of a curse, and men will see ghosts where there are only shadows, hear voices where there is only wind, and yield their judgment into another's hands. You, Watson, as a medical man, must combat such weakness as surely as I combat crime. Science is the antidote to fear.
He rose and paced the room, his dressing gown flowing about him like a scholar's robe, his voice animated now with that peculiar energy which seized him whenever a case had reached its conclusion.
Observe the progression, Watson. First, the legend of the gypsy woman, a fertile soil into this soil. Price sowed terror by feigning his own death. Next, he contrived voices by means of tubes, and spectral light by lantern and moon. Then, emboldened, he struck down those who strayed near the falls, thus strengthening the illusion of supernatural vengeance. It is the very anatomy of fraud, legend, illusion, and murder, each feeding upon the last.
And yet, but for your intervention, he might have succeeded. The colonel might have abandoned his estate, and Price seized his mineral riches.
True, but fraud always contains the seed of its own destruction. Thrice grew reckless, and in slaying the curate's son, he provoked inquiry from outside. Thus, crime ever defeats itself in the end.
I sat long into the night after Holmes had retired, reflecting upon the strange adventure we had shared. Thick in the roar of the waterfall, I seemed still to hear the cries of the victims, yet mingled with them was the calm voice of Holmes, dissecting illusion with scalpel like precision. And I thought to myself that if ever posterity should know of these adventures, it must know not only the triumphs of reason, but also the shadows of human passion against which reason contends. For though Holmes was right to dismiss the curse as fiction, the fear it inspired was no less real, and in that fear lay tragedy. Thus I set pen to paper to record the case of the cursed waterfall, hoping that it may stand as both a warning and a lesson, a warning against the dangers of credulity and a lesson in the power of clear deduction. Holmes, I murmured at last, as sleep stole over me, it is indeed as you say. Everything is elementary when once you show the chain, this. But for me, the world will always hold mysteries, so long as men are moved by terror and by greed.
Then, Watson, came his voice from the shadows. The world shall never lack for work for you and me.
And with that, the fire sank low, the city outside hummed on, and another chapter closed in the chronicles of Sherlock Holmes,